So we just finished a retreat here. We had a 5-day meditation retreat that included a handful of people participating full time, and also a number of other people that were participating part time in a very wide array of part time, from occasional drop ins to people that would join us every morning and evening, to people that would join us for most of the day. And the teaching during the session was on the 4 Brahma Viharas, the immeasurables, cultivating the positive qualities of the heart, which is very much a fundamental Buddhist teaching, but has not traditionally been a Zen teaching in particular. Nonetheless, our teachers always emphasized them. So we put them forward in this retreat. And there was one chant that we did during the retreat, which I wanted to share with you tonight, which in a way doesn't have to do with any of this, but is quite lovely. And it was written by a Chan Buddhist practitioner who was the head priest at the Berkeley Center in his lineage for several decades up until today, I believe. His name is Reverend Hong Zhi, trained maybe between the United States and China in the Chan Buddhist tradition. And Chan and Zen are the Chinese version and the Japanese version of the same tradition. And this person, when he was younger, upper 20s, he and another practitioner did a pilgrimage up Highway 1 in California over the course of several hundred miles. And this was a bowing pilgrimage, which is a practice that exists in some places of the world, including India, including Tibet. And the practice involves doing a full prostration, taking 3 steps, doing another prostration, 3 steps, another prostration. So traveling in this way, these 2 monks traveled from Anaheim to Ukiah over the course of 2 years and 6 months. And this was 1977 through 1979 that this took place. And then upon arrival, founded their practice center. Now, with some familiarity with walking long distances, because Shanae and I have, there were not formal prostrations involved, but we, a couple of years ago, walked from Texas down to Panama. And one thing that distinguishes that kind of trip, when you're really committed to only transporting yourself with your body and nothing else, is wherever you are, you really are. So I understand, some understanding, appreciation of what these 2 monks might have felt when they finally reached what was going to be their new practice center. They had really landed when they got there. You can imagine the anticipation. There's a book that they wrote about it, which I haven't read, but of course, the entertaining question that the interviewers love to ask them was like, did anybody ever harm you in any way? And they were apparently robbed a handful of times and did have weapons pulled on them a number of times what state of mind of a person pulls a weapon on somebody who's prostrating? I really don't know. But when we recognize things as strange to us, sometimes we respond in really strange ways. And obviously, this was not something that people were used to seeing. One of these two monks was in the middle of a 6-year vow of silence. So during these approximately 3 years, he was not speaking. I believe that the other monk was and could facilitate conversation on his behalf. Obviously, part of the renunciation in not speaking for 6 years is not making requests. They had made a commitment not to go indoors during those 3 years. They would sleep in a car at night, so there was a passenger vehicle that would follow them that had an altar. It was an old station wagon, and they would sleep in the station wagon at night. But that means the days of walking and prostrating were rain or shine, right? And it seems crazy to us, but that's been the life of the birds forever. It's amazing what we can get used to when we choose to. Coming into spiritual practice, perhaps we don't really do it until we have learned that changing our circumstances will no longer serve us. Only then do we find the conviction to sit still with our own mental formations, impulses, and challenge them. Because when we still believe that we can change things outside of us, we keep trying to. And when that fails enough times, then we really say, okay, let's look at the one thing that I haven't yet addressed, which is me. Now, living is nuanced, and one of the definitions of, one of the biological definitions of a living being is it has the ability to manipulate its environment in some way. This is even true with an amoeba. So that's not something that we can divorce from the human experience. Nonetheless, we inevitably, time after time after time, find the same cycles of suffering happening in our lives, the same, why is this happening again? And finally, we decide, okay, let's really look. And if we decide to enter something as structured as a meditation retreat, what we inevitably discover is that our very mechanism of thinking is in large part a means to change reality. And it's quite an insight to really see this about ourselves. to see that the future, as we hope it to be, the future that we fear, the past that we'd like to remember, or the past that we're upset about, all arise from a very simple dissettledness in who and how we are in the present moment. As we let go of these memories, would not be the right word, but rehearsed memories would be, or important plans. As we let go of them, we inevitably come into a certain discomfort that has been their fuel. And it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. We can experience this in very subtle day-to-day levels of where it can be as simple as we don't like what's happening right now, so we start to fantasize about what we're going to do next. That mundane. Or it can be that there's the circumstance of our life is really rubbing us deep. And instead of feeling that conflict, we're imagining how we would like our life to be different regularly. And it's not that we should divorce ourselves from the ability to change our lives, but rather we should be really true and honest about the experience of what it is that is gnawing at us, and come to a point of peace with that. Because if we don't, and we do change our life, that gnawing will come with us. There was a quote on the office door of one of my teachers for years, and it said, geographic therapy does not work because wherever you go, you're there. Right? So that is not, it's 90% true. 90% true. Reverend Hong Zhi was a folk musician, and he had ordaining in the Chinese Chan tradition asks more renunciation than is asked by those who ordain in the Japanese Zen tradition. And abandoning music was absolutely a requisite, but he happened to have a teacher that was very open. I don't know if his teacher was Chinese or American, who asked him to pick the guitar back up again. And there was a conference held. It was one of a series of dialogues between Benedictine Catholics and Buddhist monks. This dialogue was held in Indiana shortly after 9/11. And the topic was discussing the rule of Saint Benedict, which is the Benedictine monastic code, as seen from a Buddhist perspective. Now, in that decade, in part inspired by some of the work that Thomas Merton was doing to get different monastic cultures to communicate, there was a lot of retreats happening, at least in this country, that involved an intersection between Zen Buddhism and Benedictine monasticism. Zen teachers would, I believe Robert Aiken, one of Mushin's first teachers, led sesshin for Trappist monks, for example. Trappist, Cistercian, Benedictine are all in relationship. So they had this gathering, a gathering of 250 people, in part just an interfaith dialogue, in part evolving these monastic traditions into modernity, and in part processing the grief around 9/11. It was hosted by the Catholics, who asked the Buddhists to close the event with a dedication of merit. And a dedication of merit is taking time after a practice period, an event, anything, a day, a meal, a conversation, and dedicating any merit that has accrued to the welfare of others, or generally to all sentient beings. Hongzhi and his teacher, I think, took a translated an old Chinese text. I looked to find out what the text was, and I couldn't discover what it was, but they said a 1300-year-old Chinese text, and translated it. And the translation of that is now on page 4 of this chant book. Zane, would you mind walking around with chant books for anyone who doesn't have one? If you don't have a chant book under your mat, would you raise your hand and Zane will bring you one? So it's called Dedication of Merit. And Hongzhi put it to a melody. And the melody, I just learned this, was to a song by a Canadian musician. Her name is Lorena McKennett. And she had a song that's very, very lovely called Dark Night of the Soul, whose lyrics came from the writings of Saint John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul. So it's a song that has made this beautiful cycle from words from this beautiful Catholic teaching, which is really about the difficulty that we experience when we start to let go of the things that we need to let go of and start to enter the reasons why we wanted to hold on to them in the first place and start to endure this dark night of the soul. She wrote this exquisite song. Then a Buddhist priest took her melody and put a 1300-year-old Buddhist dedication prayer to her melody. And then, just for purposes of fun fact, a Cistercian monk that he met then took his song and added a Sanskrit mantra to it, and is now using that for some of his ceremonies. So if you look in your chant book, the words begin with, "May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with life, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright." May every living being share the fruits of peace is the first prayer. May every living being share the fruits of peace. May every living being share the fruits of peace. So these dedications are the concrete examples of where prayer exists within Buddhism, which is something that goes back a very long time in Buddhism, but the kind of Buddhism that landed in this country and was inherited by some of us, a lot of that aspect got filtered out because it's not what people were as interested in. But now feeling for lack of devotion, some of it's really making its way back in. May every living being share the fruits of peace. This is a prayer, and it's rooted in a recognition of our interconnection. Because if we didn't feel that interconnection, we would not be empowered to make such a prayer. Dedications of merit are not offered requesting something from someone. I think in a talk here recently, I spoke about this question that Buddhists sometimes receive of who do you pray to? And from a Buddhist perspective, that doesn't quite, the question doesn't quite land. It doesn't so much make sense because it implies a certain kind of, it implies a certain kind of separation, as if when I really dropped an intention or prayer or vow into the depths of my own heart and my own mind, as if that were somehow separate from your own. But that's not the Buddhist view, which recognizes that we all meet at a point and that we can pray from this place. Why would we assume that our minds are separate? May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity. So grammatically, that line is a little bit awkward, but I think what he's doing is, if people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, meaning unity can be found in giving. The quote on one of our dana, generosity cards that's outside the temple, is a quote from Shakyamuni Buddha that says something like, if you knew as I did the benefits of generosity, you would not, I've heard it translated different ways, but you would not have so much as a meal without sharing it with others. May their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. So saying a dedication of merit is about transforming our intention for living. When we say with sincerity, may every living being share the fruits of peace, we intend to live in such a way. This is a meditation that we do. And there are practitioners who will use mantras like such phrases in day-to-day living. And I've read descriptions of Catholic monastics that would take on mantras, and as they were in dialogue with people working as clergy, they would have these mantras going in the background of their minds to ensure that their intention was what they wanted it to be while they spoke with people. It's very beautiful to imagine really having that space of mind, such that while you're engaged in a back and forth with someone, at the same time there's this proactive current of loving kindness, of devotion, of prayer. We didn't so much during this last meditation retreat emphasize mantra or meditation phrases, and I feel that was a mistake, because they're very helpful. When our minds and hearts have quieted enough such that we can really sit in a space that is before reactivity, before thought, it is true that we can engage the deeper currents of loving kindness, compassion, without giving rise to language. We can work very directly at the level of the heart. But it's also a very useful tool to use phrases in our meditation to cultivate our own heart space and relationships with others, to cultivate prayer, to really imagine someone and speak to ourselves, may you be free from fear and anxiety. May you be at ease, may you be happy. And to continue those phrases, or whatever phrases you feel is appropriate for your relationship with that person. And if we do so, repeating this mantra, we get closer and closer to the actual relationship that we have in our hearts with this person, and start working with that some, which infuses our waking relationship with them. And of course, it can be a person, a group of people, a situation, a large group of people. It can be a political party. It can be the world. It can be the universe, anything we have a relationship with. We can work with that relationship. May kindness find reward is the first line of the second verse, which is such a beautiful line. May kindness find reward. Now this one I love thinking about as an actual devotional prayer to God. Like, God, I've been thinking about this and I love the design, but I got a suggestion. May kindness find reward, and quickly. That's the world that I would like to see. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. Now that's an interesting line. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. So what is actually being asked in that line? Because it is not that people be without grief and pain. If you know of any of the research around people who are born with a rare neurological disease in which they don't feel physical pain, things don't turn out so well for their bodies. They become severely injured at very young ages. So what's really being, it's a real thing. There's a lot of information on it. What's really being asked for there? May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. So here it comes full circle and comes back to St. John of the Cross's teaching of the dark night of the soul. Because that's what it feels like. It feels like an endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. So, is that the case? That when we really experience universal connection on the level of the heart, does this world of pain turn into paradise? That's the question. You could take it on for simplicity, looking at just a dyad, a relationship of two people. When you are in conflict in a world of pain in this relationship, when you find the point where your hearts touch, how does that pain transform? And then finally, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. And to truly make this prayer, I feel we want, as best we're able, to really enter the source, and pray from that point. Because if we have conviction in our connection based on personal experience, based on faith and teachings, based on glimpses of insight, then our aspirations are connected, matter, and make a difference. Let's close with this chant this evening. We do the four. So we'll close with the four great Bodhisattva vows, but then for service, we'll do this chant. Yeah?
Instead of the Gon Choko one?
Yes, that's right. Okay? Great. So we'll now do the four great Bodhisattva vows, which I think are just on the next page.
Yeah, page 5.